So now when we get down to business, we're going to start this conversation under the premise that everyone in the room knows rates are higher and affordability is a major part of our world today. We don't want to talk about interest rates a lot because really we all know what the environment is. So we're going to talk about a lot of other things that really haven't hit mainstream media as much. So we're going to start this conversation with zoning challenges, and more specifically the acronyms NIMBY, which is not in my backyard, which most of us have heard, banana, build absolutely nothing anywhere near anything, and note, not over there either. So we're going to start with Hans Klinger from HHHunt, and can you share how these sentiments are impacting the overall timeline, Hans?
Yeah, so I'll start off by just a quick little story. My favorite show watching these days is The Office. It's been on reruns for a while. Every time I watch TV, it seems to be on. And one of the main characters in that is Andy Bernard, and he just reminisces about his days at Cornell and just the old times and so forth. When I talk with a lot of developers and in a similar situation we are, they reminisce about the old days. Well, there's a quote that Andy has at the end of the very final show that's staying there. He says, "I wish you would know that you're in the good old times before you left them." So it seems like we always are dreaming about the old days of how easy it was and so forth. And zoning is all about change. So we're always looking to change a piece of property from one use to another, and that just goes against our human nature. Humans, we just don't like change. So a good example of this recently, I'm involved in a zoning case for an apartment community, 250 apartments. And on the piece of property, it's about 20 acres, and there's 16 trailers there that people, are living in. And the property's run down. There's, debris everywhere. It just doesn't look the best. And we're going to replace it with an $80 million apartment community. So we had a community meeting. All the neighbors from, Jameson came over, and they were like, "Why are you taking away these trailers?" And just like, we showed pictures of a nice apartment community, and they didn't want anything to change with it, even though what we were proposing was arguably a nicer community, and plus 250 versus maybe 16. Let's flip that around a little bit. What if we had a nice apartment community and then we want to replace it with trailers? I mean, the reaction probably would be the same. Like, we just don't want it to change. So inevitably, it's all about change. And in fact, I was talking with some friends of mine. I live in Hanover County, which is just north of Richmond, and they were remarking on us like, "Oh my goodness, just the building. There's so many homes going up everywhere," and I'm very much a data person. I know the data that's not the case. It's just perception, but to their opinion, it's like, oh, it's being overbuilt. If you go back 25 years in Hanover County, there was about 1,000 building permits being issued. Today, there's about 500. So it's almost half of what it was 25 years ago. We're just not replacing the housing stock as fast anymore. And that's looking into the future. There's not many zonings that are being approved either. RCI, a builder out of Richmond, they're fighting a lawsuit now against Hanover County. They were denied a zoning case that arguably was even below the comprehensive plan limits. The water, sewer was there, negligible impact on the roads, the schools, and they got turned down. Jay Hicks with Gerald Properties last month up in Stafford County got denied on a similar situation. They had an age-restricted community, so there's zero impact on schools. In the comp plan is what they were proposing, and got denied on that. But you'll find this true with all the board of supervisors. Politics is local, and people elect them because people don't want change. They don't want more housing, and it's just a common occurrence. So the trend is fewer approvals, not more. But once in a while, we do get a zoned piece of property through, but it doesn't always take a short amount of time. I just completed a zoning case in North Carolina in the town of Cary, which is right next to Raleigh. And I submitted the zoning application October of 2022. So we proposed zoning from the existing use was for 39 single-family detached homes. We were going to upzone it to 72, so an increase of 33 homes, right? We didn't get the approval till last month. That's 19 months that we've had the zoning process going. And ironically, when we got to town council, it was a consent vote. Like, we had gone through all of the headaches and everything. It should have been a rubber stamp. It took us 19 months to get approvals on this. And then it's going to take another year of design, another year of construction. From the time that we put the contract on the property till you see the first house, it's 4 years. So developers like predictability. when you have zoning applications that go in and you're thinking maybe it's a year, it ends up being more than a year and a half, it just makes it tough. It makes it more expensive, and that's what leads to higher home prices because, we're not paying the difference in cost there. It's being passed on to the consumer. So it's little chunks of costs that get to increase, at a time. So back to Andy Bernard, I wish we were in the good old times. Unfortunately, we got to do something to make it better, but we probably live in the good old times now. In 20 years, we're going to look back at this time and think, man, look how easy it was at this time.
Can I say something? On what Hans said about it was 4 years. From a financing standpoint, it's very tough when, typically for a development loan, developer buys the land, maybe a year it would go into development. You can see it, the bank gets repaid in, 36 months. But in that case, it's tough for a bank to, what we're having to do now is do land loans, which from a risk profile is fairly risky for a bank when it's taking so long from a rezoning and construction plan approval. It's unknown what the ultimate lot count might be, and so you have basically we're doing raw land loans with, at this point, may not even be zoned, and then it's going to be 18, 24 months of construction plan approval, and then that whole time the interest meter's ticking. There's no cash flow, so it just adds to the cost for the developer. It's probably, ideally the bank would like to kind of do an A and D loan at the same time, not have a long-term land loan on the books too. So it adds to, to all the concerns that Hans talking about.
Hans, there are some opposition groups out there whom we're not going to name, but can you speak to what tools they're weaponizing to disrupt development growth?
Sure. So when you talk about zoning, the pandemic changed sort of how things are happening. Before, most of the zoning hearings were in person. When the pandemic happened, we had to adjust to that, and most of our meetings are, on video calls too. Now the localities will give the option for people to, to phone in or voice in with their opposition. Remember a case years ago where the community, we were extending a road into a new community, and they had all the kids in the neighborhood line up in the end of the cul-de-sac. We were extending the road, and we got to the meeting, and they popped this picture up and said, all right, so which one of these kids do you want killed by a car? We're going to increase traffic on this road. So it's like, oh, well, nowadays that just gets distributed digitally. These are, a blessing and a curse, but it's where we get our information. Information moves at the speed of light, right? Well, misinformation does as well. So as soon as the misinformation gets out there, it spreads like wildfire, and it's a hard time trying to catch up to oppose that or catch up to correct it. Zoning cases I've been involved with, Facebook is probably the number one tool that people use. Most neighborhoods, established neighborhoods, have some kind of Facebook group that they're into. And unless you have someone that's in the community that's your ally, it's hard to know what's going on behind the scenes. There's some cases we've been fortunate to have inside information of this is what they're saying, so we can address that quickly. We've even talked about, we've never done it, but can we create a fake person and insert themselves in there, but you have to get approval to join that group, so we haven't done that. But so the key is to get ahead of that information as fast as you can. So what we typically do is try to have a website that we post the information, factual information. This is what's happening. This is the process. Here's the steps of what's going to happen for it. And the best you can do is just try to get ahead of the information before it goes off rails. But at the end of the day, it's headed to a public hearing. Everybody has their right to be heard. And then back to my earlier point, the politicians, they're going to respond to their constituents because they want to get elected again. We try hard to win cases and trying to convince the locality that this is what's needed, and that's the battle we face.
Thank you, Hans. So we're going to hear from Todd Robertson from Stateson Homes. Todd, what's happening with the local, state, and federal governments that's impacting rezoning, and what are those long-term effects?
So we are in an affordability crisis. I think everyone in this room probably knows that and sees it. 24%, or roughly $100,000 of the cost of a new home is directly attributed to government regulation. It was really exciting hearing Skylar talk a few minutes ago about going on offense, because I feel like we've been on defense for a long time, and it's easy to be always fighting bills, and I think we have to really get on offense. I want to talk more about local because I have an interesting scenario that I was involved in over the last 2 years. The mayor of a city that we do business in, she calls me up and she said, "Hey, Todd, I know we have a problem. I get all this feedback, but I don't have details." So I immediately took that opportunity to give her a lot of details and challenged her a little bit on the whole attitude of what you saw within her staff. And it got her attention, and she immediately reached out to other builder developers in the community, and they started doing interviews. And out of that came a stakeholder committee. And so they asked me to be on the stakeholder committee, and we were going to review about 30 items that had come up in these interviews and whether they needed to be policy, procedures, or local code or not. So the first morning I get to this meeting and introductions around the table. You know how many builder developers were asked to be on the committee? 1. There were 8 city officials, 3 managing partners from the engineering groups around the area, and 1 citizen who just happened to be a former zoning administrator from a local, another municipality, right? And so right out of the gate, I'm like, this isn't setting up real well. And 9 meetings of 3+ hours each over the following 18 months, I was able to make 1 change. That particular city, if we look at just what's different in their own codes or policies and procedures, adds about $25,000 to the cost of each developed lot. And so I think I was naive of fully understanding what was going on, but being associated with that process over 18 months, and at some point in time, I think the conversations, they got very comfortable with me. So I got to hear kind of what they thought about us as builder developers, and it's not good. It is an us versus them attitude, and it was very, very concerning, and it really highlighted the need to go on offense for me personally. But it's a hard fight because it's one thing to fight everyone in this room in the state of Virginia to go against the state, because that's one entity, right? And we can influence that a little easier. But now you take all the municipalities across the state of Virginia. It's a hard, hard battle. And I spent 60+ hours, and I made 1 change that was about 1/3 of what should have been done and the cost. And so it's a tough fight. And we've got to go on offense, and I'm not sure what the answer is, but my eyes are open to what the challenges are.
Thank you, Todd. So we're going to hear from Jesse. Good morning, Jesse, again. It's good to see you. So Ryan Homes is a large builder who builds in multiple markets and all over the state. What are you consistently seeing in regulatory issues?
Thanks, Maya. I think what Hans and Todd have referenced here is prevalent, certainly across the state of Virginia. It's national. Skylar did a fantastic job talking about this. This is a true crisis for our country. And I think the state of Virginia is migrating much more towards a crisis than we realize. I think I like to think of this in 2 buckets. When we talk about regulation, there's bucket 1, that is mostly driven at the local level, and this is prevalent across the state, that increases cost to the home that the consumer can actually generate some level of value from, right? We see this in the form of minimum square footage requirements, right? A family that says, I need, or a municipality that says, we need to have all 2,500 square foot minimums in this neighborhood. Well, a family can, they can come to the conclusion that they need a 2,500 square foot house. They can pay more for that than a 2,000 square foot house. There's a value to the consumer there. I think I would personally prefer to have the marketplace determine that. I think those are some antiquated assessments that are done. A 2,500 square foot minimum from a house that's 20 years old relative to the way a new home lives. There's a drastic difference there. But that consumer can wrap their head around why they would pay more for a 2,500 square foot house. So again, that's bucket one. Bucket two is when we have regulation that adds no value to the customer. There's literally no benefit to that regulation. And we see that in the form of some of the stuff that Hans and Todd have talked about. Capital costs are a real issue. And so when I have a neighborhood that takes me, Hans' example of 2 years, just rezoned a property, it was from initial acquisition to rezoning was a 7-year process in the Hampton Roads market. And so that does not fit in Tracey's formula, I can assure you. Right, so we have that cost of capital increase that gets offloaded to the consumer. We have situations where we're looking at regulation, in some cases from the federal level, with this new requirement that's coming out in 2025. HUD is now going to dictate all new homes that are going to have HUD financing. So if your customer is going to have an FHA loan or USDA loan, that home needs to be built to 2025 or 2021 energy standards. Well, we're fortunate in the respect that the state of Virginia is in Climate Zone 4 and not Climate Zone 5, because if we were in Climate Zone 5, it effectively eliminates the ability to have 2x4 exterior wall construction. I think there's a lot of us in this room that are going to have to come to the conclusion, do we change our entire product portfolio to 2x6 exterior walls to make it easier on us meeting those standards? And so those are fundamental changes that the consumer probably doesn't see value in. I think I'm not a huge fan of bats. I don't know if anybody else in this room feels that same way. But that's another great example, right? We now can no longer clear property during the best time of the year to develop property. And if the construction plan process takes longer than it used to, and I somehow fall in that window where now I can't clear property to bring new homes to market, and I have to wait a year to avoid the bat migration, I'm now adding a greater amount of cost to capital to carry that property. And all that expense gets passed on to the consumer. And I think, when Skylar's talking about the crisis of the vast majority of our population literally can't afford a home, there are, Todd's point, 25,000 in some municipalities. That's in addition to all this stuff that's completely hidden that we don't even see. And so I truly believe the solution here is education, because I don't think our local officials and sometimes our state officials recognize what we're doing by creating this regulation. And so I think it's up to all of us to be very engaged in the process and educate everybody that we touch to hopefully we can change the tide there and make housing more affordable as we look to the future.
Thanks, Jesse. I think if you have another one of those projects, Tracey might be retired by the time you get it. So we're going to hear from Christopher Brement next. So another challenge is labor shortage. So Christopher, Bramante Homes is a custom builder out in Charlottesville. Can you share what you've been seeing out in your area?
Yeah, absolutely. Also wanted to thank you, Maya, for the energy you've brought to this panel. That was a strong intro for everyone. I want to thank HBAV for having us all here, being a part of this. We all know what labor shortage is. I don't need to talk about that. And I don't need to talk about how it's different in Charlottesville than it is in your market, or how it's different for a custom home builder versus a production builder, or even lending institutions. I mean, our industry has a flywheel that touches so many people. And I heard you, Hans, it's not as easy as it used to be. People are not working to their fullest capacity, and so I'll touch back to that. But I don't want to talk so much about what is labor shortages, cause, effect, and what are we doing about it, or what are we going to do about it? Cause is really simple. Demand exceeds supply. The word crisis has been said a lot up here on the stage, and we feel it in our marketplace too. We're small, we don't have a lot of labor, and we've got lots of money coming to town, whether it's from out of town or already there, and it perpetuates the issue. Effect. Not only do prices escalate, but schedules and quality suffer too. My clients were frustrated 5 years ago. Now it's worse, and we've got to offset that. But it's not just the effect on the clients. A schedule slippage is a powerful thing, and it can affect your net margin. While gross margin can be protected with good estimating, schedule slippage increases your overhead per job, and it dilutes your net margin. I would argue that my company is the smallest one on the stage here, and I know there's a lot of little guys out here in the little smaller companies out here in the crowd too. There was a time when it was good enough to be good at building custom homes, but if we want to survive in this marketplace, we need to understand our numbers more than ever. And if you're not hitting your schedules, and you don't understand those numbers, it really is hurting you more than you know. We can sidebar about that later. What are we going to do? Number one, support your local home builder association's workforce development efforts. This elephant is big, and we've started eating it. Some localities are doing a better job than others. Here near the coast, I don't know the details of it, but your education program is huge. It's a big magnet. It's bringing a lot of people in. I couldn't be more proud of the good that you guys are doing over at AHBA. Bradley Bryant, you are teaching our youth to bring more labor to our market that we need so much. Two, always be recruiting trades and employees. Your trade's success is as important as your success. You won't be successful if they're not. And they're small businesses too. Coach them. Understand your numbers, understand their numbers. Understand that you can't succeed without each other. For employees, recruit as hard as put as much effort into your recruiting as you are into your selling of your homes. You need to be that good if you want to get the talent and keep the talent. Define your vision. Understand your core values. Discharge your vision while embodying your core values. Live by your culture. Hire and fire by it. Your business will run better and your team will be happier. Incentives can be good, but be careful with them. It's easy to give away more to people to get more in return, but if you're just giving and you're not holding them accountable, you can be taken advantage of. Be candid about roles and expectations. Offer the incentives, but hold them accountable, both your trade partners and your employees. This last one, number 4 for me, is unlock human capital. And it's a big deal to me because it's something that we've seen play out in my business over the last 18 months. Show of hands. Who's getting at least 80% from your trades and employees? Who thinks it's less than 80%? Yeah, that's a big difference. What do you think 20% more efficiency from your team would do for your home building or your lending business or your attorney's practice? Whatever the idle capital is, think of the difference you can make by simply getting more from your current team. Sure, you've got campers and cranks on your bus. I invite you to consider whether they're helping or hurting you. But more importantly, I believe that by inviting someone to consider whether they're the best version of themselves that they want to be, you will see light bulb moments. Not everyone is going to respond. Work on your approach. You will unlock the idle capital that's already in your business. And these folks that respond to that opportunity are oftentimes leaders. And I believe you can see exponential growth. And I know that that's what we've seen in the last 18 months.
Thanks, Christopher. So eloquently said. So we're going to hear from Doug Bennett. So Doug, in addition to labor shortage, there's also supply chain concerns in a post-pandemic era. Doug Bennett from Commonwealth Building Materials is the best one to shed some light on this for us. So Doug, what's been happening with the cost of materials and the supply chain, and how is that affecting builders and ultimately the end consumer?
Good morning, everybody. I first want to congratulate a lot of you because after last night at the bar, I'm stunned to see half of these tables full, and I'm actually amazed about the turnout this morning. So it's actually really good. So
And
thank
their
y'all for
eyes are
being here.
open.
Yeah,
All these eyes are open too.
yeah, everybody's awake. So thank you for being attentive. I want to have a disclaimer. Like interest rates, I am not going to talk about lumber. I have no business talking about it. There are a lot more qualified people in this audience than me to talk about lumber. So keep that in mind when I'm talking. I'm talking a broad stroke about distribution in general. So, challenges in distribution of products and pricing post-pandemic. I'll do a show of hands too, but I'm hoping for a little more participation than he got. Who all still has increased material costs since COVID? Okay, I think the number one question that I get on a monthly basis, even from a builder, as a distributor, is when are costs going down to where they were? And again, I'm not addressing lumber because I heard a rumor this morning it is post-pandemic pricing. So the answer to that's pretty simple. There's a lot of buckets, as Jesse would say, involved with that. When we look at pricing and distribution with what you guys are dealing with from distribution, remember the supply chain behind it. So I'll use core wall as an example. A lot of you guys understand that's the material goes between townhomes. There are 54 vendors that go into the process to make core wall. Now picture a price increase to the manufacturer from 54 different vendors. Take in mind also that to produce that, it involves a boat. There's a boat involved as well. There's a train, and of course, trucking. So if you take, let's just round it up to 60 vendors, before it even hits my door to supply to anybody in this room, it's had 60 price increases. And we just talked about labor. Think about the struggles from 60 different vendors just for one product that we get every day. So to answer the question, what is pricing looking like for the next few years? This is, and I hate to paraphrase it, the new norm is here. For many products, commodity items you'll see slip here and there, up and down. We all know how that works. But overall, the pricing, and we're still having obviously demand issues as well. Who's had problems getting insulation in the past few months? Insulation, we go product by product every day as we get them. As far as lead time goes, if you called us for a certain product right now that it's an insulation product, I would give you a 6-month lead time for that product. So how do we avoid, any problems with lead times? It's simple communication. It's no different than bringing it to your attention. We talked about the zoning and other things. It's education, and as a distributor, it's our job to communicate to you guys these issues and these problems with products as they come up. On a sidebar, I was in Canada last week, and speaking of zoning and housing, I actually went to the local men's club meeting. I was on a fishing trip with my son. So I just want to show you, it's not just in America. The whole topic of the men's club meeting in Soonaris, Canada, population 200, okay, was affordable housing. And they had the same problems with zoning. This is a community with literally 4 people in government having the same issues. So I just want to say it is a struggle all around, and the biggest thing we can do is be part of the HBAV and be part of this organization where we have that say and have that voice and have one voice to go to with. So, sorry, side note there.
Thank you. I know, I feel the pain too, because I'm asked all the time, when do you think mortgage interest rates are going to come down? And I have to say, this is the environment we live in, so we have to adapt to where we are today. So I agree with you. So when, there's a storm, there's always a rainbow, and in every challenge comes an opportunity. So we've already addressed the big pink elephant in the room of inflation and rates and the increase of building materials affecting the housing industry. The silver lining, though, is that most everyone is looking at that as a bad thing, but we know that the interest rate environment has essentially eliminated your number one competitor, and that's the resale market. right? So that's really a silver lining. So we're going to change gears now a little bit. We're going to talk about the opportunities that lay ahead, and we're going to start with everybody's friend Tracey from TowneBank. So Tracey, as a commercial lending partner to financing projects, what opportunities do you see ahead for builders and developers as it relates to the ability to finance, and how has your landscape changed?
Thanks. I do appreciate that the positive is the lending environment. So I will say, I think I do get a lot of questions with what's been going on in the market. How's the bank's appetite changed? And while there has certainly been some changes, I think the bright spot is our kind of line of business in our industry. Because for a number of reasons, and one of them being, and I tell a lot of people, kind of the residential underwriting really tightened up like 15 years ago. And it stayed that way. So whereas a lot of other lines of business have recently had a lot of corrections, and with pricing, in terms of commercial real estate or C&I lending, the residential kind of space has continued to perform well. Underwriting's kind of stayed the way that it's been for several years. And then our borrowers are really well capitalized. And so in our space, with a lot of the local markets that lend to builders and developers, we've continued to be able to do business as normal, despite what's going on generally in the marketplace as a whole. So I think that's, very positive. In terms of kind of the opportunities, I think the changes that we will see are, given the scarcity of lots and the increased competition in the various markets, I think we're going to see some more, tougher developments, both for the developers and then therefore for the banks to probably get a little more creative in their lending, a little more outside the box. And I think the banks are willing to do that because the developers and the builders that we're working with today are very strong financially. And I think it's more of a partnership between the borrower and the bank than it's been for over a number of years. So I think there are opportunities. I just think that the borrower and the bank will have to get more creative, and I think there's been a willingness to do that just across the board.
Thanks, Tracey. Yeah. So now we're going to hear from Preston. And Preston, as someone who counsels in development, what factors can improve buyer leverage in negotiating?
Thanks. I do think that this is an unusual time, and there are some opportunities that result in connection with land development transactions. And I'm going to answer the question first with sort of an aspirational answer and then a more practical answer. And the aspirational answer is really what we heard from Senator Van Valkenburg, that as government regulators and policymakers begin to recognize this connection between housing and community outcomes, and they start to understand the fiscal forces, the economic forces that are connecting these issues that we've talked at length about today, that greater understanding, the education that Jesse alluded to, that I'm optimistic that there are going to be improvements in how the local governments regulate land use. That's the aspirational answer, and that's important because it drives risk. Risk, of course, is a cost. And one of the riskiest things you can do is attempt to entitle land, as Hans alluded to. If it's a 2-year horizon to get from where you are today to the entitlements, the rezoning, or whatever those approvals are that allow you to move forward with your project, that adds an incredible amount of risk, and therefore it puts strain on the lending environment for the project. And as an attorney, part of my role is to help mitigate that risk, help to mitigate the risk that an approval won't be there. And so if the regulators aren't going to mitigate the risk, then how do you figure out how to strike a land deal that helps to overcome some of that risk? And from a seller's perspective, they're looking for a payday, and they want to know that they're going to get to that payday, and that if they have to wait 2 years and it's unclear as to whether or not an entitlement is going to happen, that's a long time to wait for that payday to happen. And so from a seller's perspective, they're going to be reluctant to enter into that transaction. So how do you figure out how to offset their carry? There are ways that you can structure the transaction, of course, to help mitigate some of those concerns and allow them to stick with the transaction until the developer knows that they have what they need to build the project. But all of the things that Senator Van Valkenburg and others have alluded to in terms of how we improve that regulatory predictability. When a developer looks at a piece of land and they say, okay, I can take that down and I can turn it into the number of lots that I need to make my financing work. That's the outcome that we're all shooting for. And so there are things that we can do, I think, from a legal standpoint to try to lower that risk artificially to the extent we can, but until we really are able to get our arms around some of these issues at a state level, at a local level, I think that it's still going to be some pretty tough sledding with interest rates where they are.
Are you seeing any localities and smart policymakers shift to becoming more attuned with development and new construction? Are there any new tools available to fill in any gaps? And are there any examples that you're able to share about that?
Sure, yeah, thanks, Maya. So again, trying to take the optimistic tact here. The challenge for development is real, as we've talked about, but certain policymakers are starting to recognize those challenges. And you hear a lot of buzzwords like inclusionary zoning, especially urban areas. They're starting to recognize that, okay, we've got an affordability problem. We don't have enough affordable housing for our residents. And one of the levers they think about pulling is inclusionary zoning, which is to say, if you want to get an entitlement for your land, if you want to change the zoning, then maybe as a condition of that rezoning being approved, we're going to make you commit to providing a certain amount of affordability within that project or that community, which basically handcuffs the ability of the developer to realize some of the return on the investment that they're creating. And so unless local governments also create a offset for that, if they have to fill that gap, then really what they're doing is just creating one more barrier to the housing that they want. And so I'll use the city of Richmond as an example. They sort of recognize that rather than a regulatory handcuff that diminishes the availability of housing, new housing to be created, they chose to instead create a program where if you commit to, in a multifamily project, limiting the rents to or targeting units at a certain level of area median income, and you do that for a certain percentage of your project, the city will actually give you back a portion of the new taxes that you create on your land. So take, for example, a parking lot. If a parking lot turns into an apartment complex, the city is now going to realize a much better tax outcome because, of course, the assessed value of the property is going to go way up. And so the city of Richmond, in that instance, would give you 30 years' worth of a rebate on that new tax that's created by the apartment. And the city said, well, that's great. We're willing to make that investment because we'd much rather have an affordable project, even if it's at 80% of our area median income. We'll incentivize that project because that to us is much more valuable than the lower taxes that we're receiving on a parking lot. And so, again, that's a recognition by one jurisdiction of the economic realities that the people in this room deal with on a daily basis. And I think that's, again, what plays into the education piece. The more that we can help make those connections with our policymakers, the more that we're going to start to see programs like that that actually provide tangible tools that we can use to confront some of the challenges that our projects are facing.
Great, thank you so much, Preston. So I think we have some questions. Some were submitted in advance, and if there's any questions in the audience, I think Craig or Emily are going to be making their way around with the mic.
Yes. All right, so get your questions ready. But before we do that, we did have one that was submitted in advance, and I know Jesse has already talked about the 2021 IECC and the requirements with HUD, USDA, VA loans. The question that came in is, are there going to be any exceptions for projects that need to meet AMI requirements?
So is that in regards to residential lending, I assume?
Yes.
Okay, so for those of you in the room who don't know what IECC is, it's the International Energy Conservation Code. There is no guidance out right now about any exceptions for projects that need to meet AMI. Tracey, have you heard anything differently? Yeah. So there's no guidance
I wouldn't
out
know.
currently.
So I don't know.
Okay, yeah. So there's no guidance out currently on any exceptions process.
Well, that was quick. All right.
Yeah. Any other
The answer
questions?
was no.
Oh, hold on. Jesse has something to add.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I believe there are no exceptions to that. And it goes back to the kind of my comment earlier. There's going to be a significant cost increase to the house that needs to be offloaded to the consumer. And there's no variance there, right? So it's, again, adding to the affordability crisis. My understanding right now, Fannie and Freddie have not dovetailed in behind HUD. We fully expect that to happen. So, as a builder, you're going to have to make the decision, am I going to assume that that's going to happen? And so if I'm going to sell a house to a customer that I think is going to take a loan, then I'm going to have to play this game. I doubt all of us only sell to cash buyers, but that may be, if there's somebody out there that does that, maybe you could get around this. But this is what's happening in the future for sure.
Let me add one more thing to that conversation on this. So Habitat for Humanity, arguably great organization providing affordable homes for people. I saw recently my local Habitat for Humanity, they had some homes planned out, and they were counting on USDA funds for the financing of that. And they said, we're not going to be able to get that now. They're not going to build the house to a 21 energy code for Habitat for Humanity. So while it's good intentions, the government's always like good intentions, like energy code, and make homes more energy efficient. The impact is real, that it actually affects other things that are unintended. So.
I think Jesse said it best. A lot of my own building partners are being proactive in adopting these new and building to these new codes versus being reactive and waiting. So, any questions from the audience? I think Craig's making his way around.
This isn't really a question, but I think another looming threat to our industry is where by right development is being addressed as being required to be entitled like rezoning. Being from Northern Virginia, well, the state of Northern Virginia, because it wants to act independent of Richmond, is trying to make by right development more of an entitlement process. So that's another issue that is looming throughout different areas, mostly the more developed and larger communities or cities in the state, that we need to be more on the offensive. But what is also happening, and we talked about this earlier, what can we do offensively instead of sit back, as Skylar was saying? And what we need to do is embrace some of these groups. You've heard of missing middle housing for Arlington. You've heard of Housing for All, City of Alexandria. These are programs, and mostly they're pushed by groups that represent underserved and exclusion zoning areas that people from the workforce cannot afford to purchase homes. So it's a lot of minority groups that are saying we're left out of the process. We need to embrace these groups and basically support them and work with them to push our legislators to basically make these changes. And some of these changes are working. In Arlington, there's more density. In the City of Alexandria, we're finding that we can do more because of the zoning changes that was kind of done under the radar, even though it was public. And we're now able to purchase properties, get more density, and even split up the units so we can actually produce more units in the same density area or computations that bring down the price per unit so that it's more affordable. So these are things we can go on the offensive for, and keep that in mind when you're talking to your legislators.
Just to amplify Lewis's very well said comments, the making the connection between the economic reality of what a builder faces when they're not able to look at the zoning of a property and decide, can I do my project here or not? And if the answer is maybe, but only if you go through a process where the outcome is very much less than assured, that creates risk and cost, and therefore adds to the cost of housing. And that's the connection that I think policymakers need to understand at the most basic level. And that's part of that education process that I think the industry needs to continue to work on with as many partners as we can leverage. The message that I would also amplify from Lewis's comments is that when we're talking about regulation, make sure that we make a distinction between carrot and stick. A stick is a regulation that says you must do X. A carrot says we would love for this outcome to happen, so we're going to help achieve that outcome by providing something, making it easier for you to develop, lessening your parking requirement, giving you relaxed standards on some aspect of the regulatory environment, expediting your permits, making it easier for you to get through the site plan process. And so these are things that as an industry, we can help nudge the conversation away from the stick and toward the carrot. And that's where I think some partners, again, I'll use inclusionary zoning as an example, they want to do the right thing. They want to create more affordable housing. They want to help the missing middle. We need to also make sure that that conversation is happening in a way that recognizes the economic realities and doesn't inadvertently create barriers to that kind of housing being feasible from an economic standpoint.
That's great.
Preston, following up on that. Yes, Andrew. Maggie Walker Trust. And now what Henrico is doing with their putting $60 million into a trust. And back to your carrot stick approach, in Henrico County, they're saying if you have just one lot that we'll buy at market price from this trust, we'll put you in the front of the line to get your project moving through, which sounds great. I'm trying to think what the downsides are going to be of that. Because really, when we think back through a lot of things y'all have said, we've had cost increases, we've had all these other issues. Our biggest issue is time. And we have less lot supply than the time to get more lots on the ground. So that's impacting things. But time also impacts cost. So how do y'all see some of these, Maggie Walker Trust and what Henrico is talking about doing with their trust, impacting how we can accelerate the time? But what's going to be the impact of that lot in some of these developments down the road?
So let me quickly add some context to David's thoughtful question. If you don't know what a community land trust is, it's a little bit new. And so this is something that is being pioneered in the Richmond area by, as David said, the Maggie Walker Community Land Trust. A CLT is a nonprofit that buys land. And they will continue to own the land, and then they bring in someone to either rehabilitate a house that's existing on the lot, or they may find somebody who can build a house at low cost. And then they sell the house, but it's not really sold in the way that we would normally think about it. It's really leased to an owner. And the nonprofit will continue to own the land. And so think about in your community a really hot neighborhood that perhaps hasn't always been hot. And it's starting to get a lot of new investment. And so you look at a hockey stick curve of prices in that neighborhood. The CLT is thinking if we buy at the bottom when land cost is low, we can basically moderate that hockey stick curve. We can make it so that each time somebody sells the house, we're going to make it so that the value is a little bit higher than the person who previously had it, but it's not going to be at the top of that hockey stick curve, because then once you sell it one time, you've made up all that affordability. It's gone. It's out the window. And so it's a model that is intended for a nonprofit to continue to own the dirt, but they're going to they're going to lease the home to successive buyers as a way of keeping it affordable, notwithstanding whatever's happening in the community. And so, Hans, I saw you nodding. Maybe you have some comments about the specific experience in Henrico.
Yeah, it's relatively new, so we haven't got into that, but we had a zoning case recently, and the comment was made, like, hey, have you considered this? And it's new, and developers don't like new stuff until we've had experience with it. So on paper, like David said, I think it sounds like a good idea. Question is what happens down the road on this. If it means that we can get our zoning case through in a quicker time, that's ideal. I'm involved with other zoning cases where we are committed to in other states committed to a percentage of affordable income housing tied to the AMI, 80%, sometimes 60%, and that's kind of forced on you. You got to work in your equation because you're not getting that revenue from that renter that will pay for the cost of the thing, because you don't go back to landowners. So by the way, we have affordable housing included in here. We need to decrease your purchase price. It just doesn't work that way. You don't go to your suppliers and say we need to pay you less because of affordable housing in here. It's all costs along the way. So, but the overall big picture, it sets the ultimate price of the community. Ultimately, we're talking about all this land use and so forth. It's really a tax on the landowner. It goes all the way back to that. It's whatever the land is worth. It all starts with that. You can't change what the purchase price is for the consumer. You back out, developers and builders have to make a little bit of profit or we're not going to be in business long. Cost of construction, financing cost, engineering, zoning, and then the bottom of that is land cost. So at the end of the day, that's the land that's we can afford to pay you for that. Real quick anecdote. So locally here in James City County, in the rural areas, I think it was about 2 years ago, by right subdivision, Lewis was talking about by right subdivision, it was 3 acres. I think you could build on your property. So if you had 100 acres, you could put 33 lots on it, basically. They changed that to 20 acres, like over, and that's a tax on those poor farmers out there. And I say poor farmers, they're banking on that for one day that they, like everybody else, can cash in. But their voices are in the minority. The majority is everybody that's already moved here that doesn't want the countryside to change. So 20-acre lots is a pretty big deal. But that's how James City is trying to preserve the rural character out here.
David, I would add that the now Piedmont Community Land Trust in Charlottesville, Frank might be able to help me with numbers, but I would estimate 20 homes plus or minus they've built through a land trust model. And we've seen good success with that. I mean, it's similar to a habitat model in the way that access to equity is limited, but instead of parlaying proceeds from a sale through habitat back to a down payment for the next habitat community, they're really protecting the affordability of that unit. And the long-term success I believe in, although we can't see it today, but we are seeing more and more commitment to that model in Charlottesville. We've learned that it's really difficult to ask for favors from within the real estate community. So we're really trying to make as whole as we can, all participants, the builder, the subcontractors, and fund all of it through grant money, which is hard to do, but that's something I think every community needs to understand, that if we all have an opportunity to work for profit at a certain margin, and we're asked to do favors in this marketplace, the math it won't work in perpetuity. So there's got to be a different way. This is one that we're attacking, and a strike fund for our land trust is something that we're really trying to figure out. If we can be flush with cash and move quickly when we see land come available, that's probably going to be the best way to protect it for those making a fraction of our AMI.
Any other questions? I have one question, and I, like Preston, I'm optimistic, and Henrico and others are making strides and being innovative. I'm optimistic because the number of people that are at this conference, NHB is being very active and engaged on the issues with HUD, USDA, VA. So I think we're going to hopefully solve some of these problems with land availability and timelines. Turning to our focus a lot, this conference is workforce development. I know Christopher mentioned it earlier, but can each of you or one of you just say, kind of, where is that, once we open the floodgates and you have all the lots you need, do we have the people to build these homes? And how do we do it? And is your company, or your employees, your colleagues, are they paying attention to what's going on in the workforce development shortage area? Sorry, threw one out there.
Yeah, that's a lot of questions, I think, in there. But
how are you prioritizing workforce development?
Sure. So internally, we recruit at Virginia Tech a lot. It's in our backyard, the building construction real estate department, and so we have a rotating interns that end up being some of the best employees that we have, and we're usually on them a year in advance. So I don't think that part of it's a problem. We certainly see the trades as being a potential problem, and I think the thing that we've done to most impact that is to help the business leaders understand what they can pay for and what they need to do to train help. I think for too long, they're worried about, they're paying $18 an hour where maybe the real rate needs to be $30 an hour. And at the end of the day, if that electrician can probably put in one more receptacle, that paid for that extra day's work, right? And now I have an employee that's going to stay with me longer. So we really help them understand their own business. Our CFO puts together, we put their fixed cost in and show them what, if they leverage with more employees and what that can do with more work. And I think that's opened their eyes up. And some of these guys that have been doing it for, we have one plumbing company, and they may or may not be, I don't think they're here, but it's three brothers, and the youngest one's 68 years old, and the two 70-some-year-olds are humping up and down the steps every day, right? And you can't, there's a reason why it takes them 5 days to plumb a home. And so we've sat down with them and really tried to encourage them and how to recruit as well and to relate to young people. So as a builder, we have got to invest in the trades and not just sponsoring a scholarship. We've got to help teach them to be better business leaders too and recruit, because those brothers are not exactly the hot topic on the community college campus in recruiting either, right?
Craig, I'm going to flip your question a little bit, but it made me it occurred to me that there's a part of the story that hasn't really been discussed as part of our panel, and that's the economic impact that this industry and all of not only the direct employees of all the businesses in this room, but just the tidal ripples that go out from this industry and the economic impact that housing has broadly in the Commonwealth. And what's been really interesting for me to see as an observer who sort of keeps an eye on the policy discussions related to housing is how much there's an increasing link between the economic impact of housing and the economic fortunes of the Commonwealth. If you ask any member of the General Assembly, are you in favor of economic development? I'd be willing to say that pretty much everyone would say, of course. And helping them understand why a diverse array of housing, a thriving housing industry, building industry, is so foundational to our economic development goals is really important. And I think Andrew has really helped make sure that message is heard loud and clear. I've heard that as part of his narrative. But now if I go and I hear a talk by the director of Virginia's Economic Development Partnership, which is the lead cheerleader for economic development for the state, he's going to talk about housing and just any generic off-the-cuff remarks about the economic development goals that we have as a state. And so I think that's a huge success just in the narrative that this industry has worked to develop, because it's going to be so important to helping to align priorities behind the industry and making sure that we have the support that we need from our elected officials.
And I mean, and keep trying every day. It's hard, but you gotta bang on it and teach the people that are already in your organization or that aren't there yet, the kids, all of us. Our flywheel is so big. We have the opportunity to enrich the lives of many. And think about that. If you're looking at your bottom line and enriching your bottom line, but not the people that your flywheel touches, like, you're not doing it right. Give back to I mean, this is just the workforce development part of it, but it applies to everything. Keep pushing. 5% everywhere is going to be what gets us out of this. 1% everywhere is what's going to be what gets us through it.
Craig, no more questions from the audience? Okay, so we are going to leave you guys. Every panelist, I asked everybody to prepare one short, positive, strong statement to leave you guys with today. So we'll just start with Todd and come down the line this way, and please share your thoughts.
I missed that in the email, but
we're going to wing it.
I think we talked about being on the offense earlier, and I think that's come up a couple times. And as builders, we're not the victims of this affordability crisis. Our community and our residents, and I would even go on a limb and say young adults, are the biggest victims of all. And they are not getting into homes at the same age. They're living with their parents, and as a parent of mine are both out of the house, but you kind of want them out of the house, at 23 or 24, they got to go. And so we've got to fight for our community, and it's not about the builders. Everyone in this room is still doing well, but it's for the community that we're fighting for, and we've got to wake them up. I heard if we had 1/10 of the people that come out for a not in my backyard rezoning, if 1/10 of them came out to local meetings or talking to their state representatives, we'd change this. We would change it overnight. But they're not educated today enough to know how it's impacting them, and it's up to everyone in this room to educate and change minds and get them to be active.
One short, optimistic solution is that the charge more by right housing.
Love it.
There you go. I talked about the good old times, and conversely of that, like, it's like, oh my gosh, the times are getting so bad, all the issues we've got, the political unrest and so forth. And I think if you look back at any point in time, like the country was in some kind of crisis situation. So we just celebrated D-Day of 80 years. Can you imagine living in that time and just realize that the world was at war, what's going to happen in the future? And then we got the Cold War going on, and then the civil unrest going on. Just at any given point, there's some kind of strife going on. I think we just got to remain optimistic. We're involved with industry that provides homes for people. There's nothing that gives more pleasure than going back to a community and seeing where, like, I remember when this was, a piece of dirt, the trees were here, and now you got these families living here, and they're creating their own memories and lives, and it's just so easy to get caught up in the despair of the day. You just got to keep realizing that, what we do is important. We're building homes for people, and that's why we do it, and we love it.
Yeah, I was going to say a lot of kind of feeding off a lot of Christopher's comments. Like, I just appreciate, I'm always impressed at all the local associations, like everyone's involvement, like the number of people that step up and volunteer and get involved on legislative fronts and things like that. Like, I mean, that's what's going to make the change, and I think we're doing it.
I think the root of our problem is on the supply side. We do not have enough supply to address the affordability crisis. So I would say that the density at the local level will help us work through this, and that the best is yet to come.
How many people in the room consider themselves lucky? Raise their hand. I'm glad
everyone.
I'm glad everyone raised their hand. So I have a quote from Thomas Jefferson. I'm a firm believer in luck. I find the harder I work, the more I have of it. And I can tell you what, I look at everybody sitting in this room, I look at the panel, I look at everything we're talking about making a 1% difference. Hey, it just takes all of us working to do it. And even if you give 10 minutes to this cause or that cause, whatever we're looking at, or show up to a zoning meeting, that's what gets us through. Everybody in this room, and that little bit of hard work that makes the luck go.
I'm going to share a quote from our friends in the realtor community. As we know, they're dealing with some dramatic change right now, and this is from Ron Phipps, NAR past president. Change should not precipitate fear. It should precipitate discovery, empowerment, and teamwork. And if you want a case study on change, the city of Charlottesville went through a tremendous upzone late last year, and it's the wild, wild west. We're all trying to figure it out. I don't know what it's going to be, but I mean, you want to talk about throwing something into change, stay posted, give me a call. We'll talk about it. We'll figure it out. It's going to be exciting.
That's great, and I'm going to share a quote with the CEO from Deloitte, Joe Echevarria, and it's the best way to predict the future is to create it together. So we are going to, if I could get all the panelists to stand up, I'm going to close a little bit. We have some music that we're going to cue up for you. So again, really before Emily, Craig, HBA staff, can I get you guys to stand up? Can we all give them a huge round of applause for this amazing conference, having such a good time.